The story of crypto and of Cardano as a part of crypto over the last year, 2 years, we're talking 12, 24 months, has really been about us being oppressed by people in high places. But it turns out that sometimes you have friends in high places as well. And right now is one of those times for crypto and Cardano. If you instantly knew that was an AI image of Representative McHenry because there is no bow tie, or if you're finding value in these videos, please consider delegating to the Army of Spies stake pool, ticker AOS. Well, guys, it looks like our luck is improving in crypto. And of course, that also applies to Cardano because we're all kind of in the same boat as far as this federal regulation goes. At least most of the time we are. Sometimes they try to single out individual ecosystems, and we end up with things like the XRP case, which has, thankfully semi concluded. So the important part for us in Cardano has concluded. That was the part dealing with secondary market transactions for all the reasons we've talked about previously on this channel. But things are looking up. Things are looking better. And a big piece of this right now is this bill, the FIT21 Bill. That's an acronym that stands for Financial Innovation and Technology for the 21st Century. This is an act. This is a bill. This is going to change things in both the Securities Act of 1933 and the Commodity Exchange Act. That meant it actually had to go through two different committees because you've got the House Financial Services Committee and you've got the Ag Committee, the Agriculture Committee, which is confusing to people until they realize that commodities also fall under the Agriculture Committee. And we do have to change some things in the Commodity Exchange Act here. So it went through both committees this week. And it's passed both committees now, which means it goes on to the full House. The full House of Representatives now is going to look at this bill. Hopefully it passes because this might be as good as it gets for crypto. This is a pretty good regulatory regime for crypto. And it is not at all what the Gary Genslers and the Elizabeth Warrens and probably certain staffers in the White House would want for crypto, which is good for us. So I believe this is definitely regulation we can live with. So a lot of the action here is going to happen in the definitions. So we're going to cover this part of this bill. This is a 212-page document. We're not going to cover all of it. We're going to cover this section, which is going to cover all the definitions and some very relevant provisions. The only other thing we'll look at in this bill is this section, these two sections down here on DeFi and non-fungibles on NFTs. So we'll look at those briefly right at the end. But we're going to try to go through this pretty quickly so that it's not boring. We're going to try not to get into any too fine-grained a detail. We're just going to try to zoom through the important sections here. So here's the definition section. Of course, they go through all the really obvious stuff that, non-crypto people would be interested in, like what's a blockchain. But we'll get down here to the important part. What is a decentralized network? And when you see this, if you've looked at some of the previous attempts at crypto regulation, you know that they're going to use this definition to say when crypto assets can be sold. And in a lot of cases, it will only be when it's a decentralized network. We'll say sold in certain ways, but we'll get to that later. So a decentralized network. During the previous 12-month period, no person had unilateral authority to control or materially alter the functionality or operation of the blockchain system. So this is good for Cardano because in Cardano, we have three founding entities and they all have keys. They all have keys to do things like control or materially alter the functionality or operation of the blockchain system, but none of the three entities can do it alone. IOG can materially alter the blockchain like it does when we have big upgrades all the time. It can do that, but the CF or Emergo must join IOG and use their keys as well. And there may have been times at certain points when the Cardano Foundation or Emergo allowed IOG to hold their keys because there was an upgrade coming or something like that. But there are three entities holding these keys. So this provision, pretty good for Cardano. The next provision, during the previous 12-month period, no digital asset issuer or affiliated person beneficially owned in the aggregate 20% or more of the total amounts of units of the digital asset. Obviously, again, great for Cardano because all three founding entities together held less than 20%, let alone any single digital asset issuer or affiliated person. So altogether, all three of the founding entities and all their affiliated persons, I believe, it might have changed now, but at least in the beginning, all of them had less than 20%. Also great for Cardano. The ecosystems where they gave themselves far more than 20%, they're going to have a real hard time. If this becomes law, that's a big problem for those ecosystems. I mean, of course, they'll just try to dispose of their assets. They'll try to sell their assets to get into that 20%. But if they're not in the 20% to begin with, it can be a lot harder to sell those assets. Sure, they might, do some kind of like over-the-counter trade with some VC or other financial institution or something like that. But this is going to be a problem for a lot of those ecosystems that were quite a bit more greedy than Cardano. So coming up next, during the previous 3-month period, the digital asset issuer has not implemented or contributed any intellectual property to the source code. So this is a little problematic. They're basically saying, hey, during the last 3-month period, the asset issuer, whoever initially distributed the tokens or coins or their assets associated with the blockchain, can't have written any code. This is a little counterintuitive if you're in the crypto ecosystem because you kind of want those founding entities to be writing code as much as possible. And here the regulations are saying, hey, that's all fine and dandy, but you're not really decentralized if in the last 3 months the issuer has implemented or contributed any IP to the source code. But there are some exceptions. And the exceptions create some unpleasant ambiguity. So the ambiguity here has to do with this exception. They say, unless the contribution to the source code addressed vulnerabilities, errors, regular maintenance, cybersecurity risks, or other technical improvements to the blockchain system. This is pretty ambiguous because you could write a whole bunch of different types of code, contribute that to the source code of the blockchain, and call it a technical improvement. Like, what code contributed to a blockchain ecosystem is not a technical improvement. I guess you could say what they're getting at here is they don't want for the issuer to have gone in and, issued themselves, like another 45 billion tokens or something like that. That would obviously not be a technical improvement. Maybe they're after stuff like that because pretty much any upgrade to the chain, I think you could call it technical improvement. So if this language stands, again, Cardano's in pretty good shape on our upgrades. We don't have to worry about, IOG or anybody else doing upgrades because those upgrades are all going to be technical improvements. So this is an or clause also. So it's any of these things are an exception, or if the contribution to the source code was adopted through consensus or agreement of a decentralized governance system. So even if it's not a technical improvement or a bug fix or regular maintenance or any of these things up here, if the ecosystem voted on it, if there was some kind of decentralized governance that adopted that contribution to the source code, that's okay too, which is also great for Cardano because obviously we've got Voltaire kind of unfurling before our eyes right now. So next provision, this is another 3-month period provision. During the previous 3 months, any affiliated person has marketed to the public the digital assets as an investment. So obviously you've got the founding teams of these blockchain ecosystems doing a whole bunch of marketing, AMAs, YouTube videos, Twitter spaces, all of these things, just straight tweeting or Xing, whatever we're calling it now, posting on X, whatever it is. You can't have done any of those things in the last 3-month period if you are marketing the digital asset as an investment. So these ecosystems where the founders are going on YouTube and Twitter all the time and talking about what a great investment their ecosystem is, they can't have done that in the last 3 months and still be able to call themselves decentralized under this bill. During the last 12-month period, all issuances of the assets had to have been end user distributions. So this is also great for Cardano because we have a lot of distributions ongoing every 5 days in the form of staking I believe, is going to be an end user distribution under this bill. So next up, what do we have? I think we have to scroll a little bit here. Okay, the definition of a digital asset. So digital asset under this bill is any fungible digital representation of value. So it is not, and then they basically lay out everything that could be a security. So they're saying right in the definition, it can be a digital asset under this bill as long as it's not an NFT and it's not a security. This gets them out of a lot of trouble. You might have seen Representative French Hill defending this bill by saying, hey, look, right in the bill, it says, because people are bringing up, opponents of the bill are bringing up things like, hey, yeah, this might allow, companies to tokenize their stock, and that'll be problematic for us because then it becomes a token and it's, suddenly out of the regular securities regulatory regime. And you had to point out, no, it says right in the bill, if it's a security to begin with, it cannot be a digital asset in terms of the way digital assets are treated under this bill. So it also can't be any kind of a futures arrangement. Those two things are not considered digital assets. So then they get down to Howey, treatment of certain digital assets sold pursuant to an investment contract. So, Howey, we've talked about it a million times. Howey tells us what is an investment contract. And an investment contract is just one of the many things that can be a security. But something really important that Judge Torres pointed out in her recent ruling in the XRP case, something that the SEC obviously hated, was that you can have an investment contract that is a security, but that doesn't mean that the crypto asset underlying that investment contract, the crypto asset that's the subject of that investment contract, it is not automatically a security just because the investment contract creates a security. So in the case of XRP, just because that those coins or tokens might have been sold as investment contracts originally, when they were later sold in the secondary market, they weren't automatically a security just because they might have been the subject of an investment contract previously. So they say an investment contract is not and does not become, I should say, a digital asset sold or transferred pursuant to an investment contract is not and does not become a security as a result of being sold or otherwise transferred pursuant to that investment contract. This is the right take. This is the right way to address this. Investment contracts are securities, but the crypto assets that are the subject of those investment contracts are not necessarily securities. Then we've got the definition of a digital asset user. We've been using this term quite a bit, but we haven't talked about what it actually means. It's any person that in exchange for any consideration, so consideration would be like, anything of value. So any person that in exchange for anything of value issues or causes to be issued digital assets, offers or sells a right to a further issuance of a digital asset, or any person who seeks to knowingly evade classification as a digital asset issuer and facilitate an arrangement for the primary purpose of effecting it. So you can't, if you're doing something really tricky in crypto, we all know that these kinds of very tricky arrangements happen. But if you're doing some kind of like very tricky arrangement and it somehow, matches some loophole that doesn't meet this criteria, they say if you're doing those things to evade classification as a digital asset issuer, then we're just going to call you a digital asset issuer anyways. If you're doing things like granting a license or assigning intellectual property, making available free software, or granting other rights or transfer of assets material to execution of such sale, if you're doing those things in order to evade this classification, they're just going to call you a digital asset issuer anyway. They say this does not include, this digital asset issuer definition does not include, and this is really important for a lot of ecosystems like Cardano. You can already see the note on the screen. It does not include any person solely because such person deploys source code to create units of a digital asset, which are incentive-based rewards to users of the digital asset or for activities directly related to the operation of blockchain systems, such as mining, validating, staking, or other activity directly tied to the operation of the blockchain system. So if you are running a stake pool, that doesn't make you a digital asset issuer. If you're involved in staking, that doesn't make you a digital asset issuer. If you are just deploying code that creates units of a digital asset, which are incentive-based rewards, that doesn't make you a digital asset issuer. So staking is not going to be an issue under this bill, which is great because I think the Gary Genslers and the Elizabeth Warrens, probably especially of the world, would love to just straight up say staking makes you a digital asset issuer, and those digital assets are securities. That's what they would love to say. Not under this bill. Thank goodness. So they also want you to be a functional network. So you can't just be a decentralized, dysfunctional network. You also have to be a functional network. And that means the network allows network participants to use such digital assets for the transmission and storage of value, participation in services provided by or an application running on the blockchain, or the participation in governance. So this is an OR clause. So it looks like if your blockchain does any one of these three things, then you're good. They're going to call it a functional network. Then they're going to talk about permitted payment stable coins, and they're going to give you a bunch of definitions and say that permitted payment stable coins are subject to regulation by a federal or state regulator with authority over entities that issue payment stable coins. And the payment stablecoin, a permitted payment stablecoin, cannot be a national currency or a security. So this makes sense. They're going to lay out a bunch of stablecoin provisions, which are not going to be too relevant for our discussion today. Next up, we have restricted digital assets. And if you're familiar with the regulations that affect things like restricted stock, you'll be aware of why this category exists. So a restricted digital asset can be sort of three different things. If you're a regular person who's not the issuer, or a related person or affiliated person of the issuer, and you hold a digital asset at a time before the blockchain becomes functional and decentralized, and that asset was not issued to you in an end user distribution, and you didn't buy it on a digital commodity exchange, then that's going to be a restricted digital asset. Category 2 will be any digital asset held by a related person or an affiliated person during any period when the blockchain was not a functional and decentralized network, or any unit of a digital asset held by the digital asset issuer. And this definition, restricted digital asset, does not include a permitted payment stablecoin. So those are going to be restricted digital assets. And just like you're guessing, they're going to be much harder to trade than a non-restricted digital asset. So those were the definitions under the 33 Act. That's the securities law side of the world. Now we're going to go into the commodities world. Again, this is why they had to go through the two different committees, because they're changing things in the 33 Act, which is Securities, and the Commodity Exchange Act. So here is the Commodity Exchange Act part. And a lot of this is going to be very similar to what they did in the security section. The term digital commodity means any unit of a digital asset held by a person other than a digital asset issuer, a related person, or an affiliated person before the first date on which each blockchain system to which the digital asset relates is a functional network and certified to be a decentralized network. So you can tell that's exactly the same. And then you look down here, exactly the same exceptions. It was sold on a digital commodity exchange, or it was an end user distribution. And then you've got the related person section. Then you've got the actual digital asset issuer and the assets they hold. So exactly the same as the securities law section. And again, can't be a permitted payment stablecoin. Then they've got a definition for digital commodity broker. And we won't go into too much detail here other than to say what they are. We'll let the Coinbase, Kraken, and Binance lawyers worry about a lot of these sections. But the definition is basically any person who is soliciting or accepting orders for the purchase or sale of crypto, anyone engaged in soliciting or accepting those types of orders, anyone registered with the commission as a digital commodity broker. The term digital commodity broker does not include a person solely because that person makes, sends, receives, or facilitates payments involving a payment service or on a peer-to-peer basis, or validates a digital commodity transaction, operates a node, or engages in similar activity to participate in facilitating, operating, or securing a blockchain. So you're not a digital commodity broker just because you're using the network to send payments. even if it's on a peer-to-peer basis, even if it's as part of a payment service, that's not a digital commodity broker. You're also not a digital commodity broker if you're doing something like running a node or running a stake pool. So again, great for Cardano, obviously. Then you've got this other category, digital commodity custodian. This is a bank or trust company in the business of holding, maintaining, or safeguarding digital commodities. A digital commodity dealer would be any person who in a digital commodity cash or spot market holds itself out as a dealer, makes a market in a digital commodity, regularly enters into digital commodity transactions with counterparties as an ordinary course of business. Again, this is the kind of section that I think the Kraken, Coinbase, and Binance lawyers will want to look at quite carefully. I think probably most of you are not doing these things. Probably most of you are not holding yourselves out as a digital commodities dealer in a digital commodities market. So we won't focus too heavily on that. A digital commodity exchange is a trading facility that offers or seeks to offer a spot or cash market in at least one digital commodity. So pretty straightforward definitions here. And then we're going to see a lot of the same kinds of, these are a bunch of notice sections, which won't be interesting to us, but we'll see a lot of the same kinds of sections we did in the security sections. But there are some interesting things here. A person who has filed a notice of intent to register under this section and is in compliance with this section shall not be subject to an enforcement action by the Securities and Exchange Commission for listing or offering a digital asset deemed a security. So if the Coinbases or Krakens or Binances of the world decide to register as digital commodities dealers or as, any of those other categories, the SEC cannot just go ahead and file an enforcement action against them while those parties are waiting to actually be registered. If they've already filed, then this bill is saying that Gary Gensler cannot just go ahead and file an enforcement action against those parties. So there is a fraud provision here, though. If there's fraud or market manipulation, then that doesn't apply. They'll still be on the hook, and the SEC can go after them. So, or the commodities commission, on the commodities side, regulators could go after them as well. Okay. Disclosure of general information. So for these registrations of digital asset brokers, dealers, and trading systems, you're going to have some disclosures, and it's all the usual stuff, the kind of stuff you'd expect: ownership and management, financial condition, affiliated persons, potential conflicts of interest, rule books or customer order fulfillment rules, risk management procedures, descriptions of the products, product listing process, like how they decide what to list. So those are all pretty predictable. Again, we'll let the centralized exchange lawyers worry about a lot of this. I'm sure they'll be looking at this very carefully, especially if it's actually enacted. So to be clear, this has passed the committees, still needs to go through the full House of Representatives, and then we have to deal with the Senate. So a long ways to go, but this looks pretty promising. So here are some more sections we won't worry too much about. And then we get down to here, Title II, Digital Asset Exemptions is going to be an important section. So this is going to be the section where they're going to say, hey, you don't have to register with the SEC if your offering is going to meet certain criteria. If you can meet the exemption, you will not have to register. So the 33 Act is amended in Section 4A by adding this at the following. So the exemption criteria are going to be this. So during the 12-month period preceding the date of the transaction that you're trying to do, the issuance that you're trying to do, you can't have sold $75 million worth of the crypto already. So if you sold $75 million worth of this crypto asset over the last 12 months, that is not going to qualify. You're not going to meet the exemption. So, and if you've already sold $75 million worth, I think we probably don't want them exempted out. Somebody should probably take a look at that offering and see what they're actually up to. So also, there are going to be some accredited investor requirements. This is the part that's going to be very difficult on all of us regular crypto people, because the problem with the accredited investor requirements in securities laws is that they've basically kept all of us normal people from having access to investment in early stage companies. There are ways you can have, in the past, at least you could have, a few non-accredited investors in the early stages of deals, if you did sort of a family and friends, kind of raise early on, there are ways that that's been done. But, largely a company couldn't come out and do what they do in crypto all the time, which is say, hey, we're going to raise a bunch of money. We're at the very earliest stages of development. We're going to raise a bunch of money and let every single normal person in who wants to come in. That's something that can't really happen under the securities law. And unfortunately, they're putting the same kind of requirements here. So they're not completely blocking non-accredited investors, but what they are saying is that if you're a non-accredited investor, if you're a person who is not an accredited investor, during the last 12 months, this issuer trying to seek this exemption cannot have sold these non-accredited investors an amount that is greater than any of these: 10% of the person's income, 10% of the person's net worth, and that person cannot own more than 10% of the total amount of the crypto that's at issue here. So this is pretty rough because a lot of you degens, I'm sure, spend more than 10% of your annual income and probably more than 10% of your net worth. I know a lot of you probably do that. So this is going to be pretty rough. If this were to go into law, then if a project had sold to you an amount more than 10% of your net worth income, then they would not meet the exemption. So this is going to mean this is probably going to result in things like KYC and exclusion of non-accredited investors, all those kinds of things. Projects are going to have to be careful of that. If they want to hit this exemption, they're going to have to think about the difference between accredited and non-accredited investors. And while this is always supposed to have been a protection of the non-accredited investors, because they say accredited investors are more sophisticated, they can better shoulder the burden of loss, all those kinds of things. In my experience, it just ends up excluding non-accredited investors, possibly to their detriment, possibly to their benefit if they would have lost the money anyways. But I personally have never liked the paternalistic viewpoint taken by these accredited investor, non-accredited investor rules. Of course, we don't want people out fleecing, retired grandmas. We don't want that to happen. But at the same time, I think all of us in crypto who are non-accredited investors, we would probably like to just be able to invest wherever we want without this paternalistic, protectionist kind of protection in crypto. But this is in here, so we got to deal with it. So the transaction cannot involve the offer or sell of a digital asset that is not a part of an investment contract. So this is double negative. What they're saying is it must be a part of an investment contract, which is kind of funny because we're used to everybody trying to avoid the impression that a crypto sale is an investment contract that shoots it into crypto law world, or securities law world. But here they're saying in order to meet the exemption, there actually must be some kind of an investment contract that is being used to sell the crypto. So the issuer must be a U.S. issuer. This is a U.S. law. They're not saying that all issuers in crypto must be U.S. issuers. They're just saying, hey, if you want to hit this exemption under U.S. law, you must be a U.S. issuer. It can't be a shell or a SPAC deal. So this can't be, the entity can't be a shell company, and this can't be some kind of a SPAC deal where the company has no specific business plan or purpose and has indicated that their business plan is just to merge with or acquire an as yet unidentified company. So I think we can all remember how much activity there was around SPACs. What was it, like a year ago, a couple of years ago? Everyone was talking about this. So here are the disclosure requirements. They involve all the same kinds of disclosure points you're used to: name, jurisdiction in which the issuer is organized, website of the digital issuer, certification that the digital asset meets the relevant requirements described under Section 488, a description of the purpose and intended use of the offering proceeds, a description of the plan of distribution, a description of the material risks surrounding ownership of a unit of a digital asset. So these are the kind of things you normally have in securities law. You have, statements of risk factors. You have a plan of distribution. Even just in the last week, we saw a gigantic launch of a crypto ecosystem, if you will, that and you had one of the founders going on podcasts saying they couldn't describe the plan of distribution for regulatory reasons. That is obviously not the intent of regulatory regimes. They're not trying to prevent issuers from making disclosures about things like their plan of distribution, but that's the kind of chilling effect the current regulatory lack of clarity has on some of these projects. Description of the digital asset issuer and the current number of employees, description of exempt offerings, description of any material transactions or relationships between the digital asset issuer and affiliated person. So all the normal kind of stuff. And then you've got ongoing disclosure requirements. These are what we call periodic reports in the securities world. So you've got annual reports, semi-annual reports, and what they want to be in those. The ongoing reporting requirement under that paragraph shall not apply to a digital asset issuer 180 days, so half a year, 6 months, after the end of the covered fiscal year. What is the covered fiscal year? That means the first fiscal year in which the blockchain that the asset relates to is a functional network and certified to be a decentralized network under Section 44 of the Securities Exchange Act of 1934. And we'll talk about how that certification is going to work in just a second here. So basically, 180 days after the end of the covered fiscal year. And that covered fiscal year is going to be the first year that it's functional and decentralized. So you have to become functional and decentralized and then wait 6 months after the end of that year, and then you're good to go. So it's a little bit of a waiting period. You have to become functional and decentralized and then wait till the end of that year and then wait another 6 months, and then these ongoing reporting requirements can end. But prior to all that, you basically got to file these reports. So you've got the annual reports, semi-annual reports, and current reports. This kind of structure will be very familiar to everybody who's used to things like 10Ks and 8Ks here. Let's see, what have we got? What is next? So transactions in certain restricted digital assets. Remember, we went through all that complicated definition of a restricted digital asset. Now they're going to tell you how you can actually transact in those restricted digital assets. They say, in general, a restricted digital asset may be offered and sold on an alternative trading system by any person other than the issuer, if it's a functional network and it's been certified to be, is it decentralized? And the information, no, sorry, it's functional and the information described in that other section has been certified and made publicly available. So that is when a normal person can trade on an ATS in a restricted digital asset. So, but they have additional rules for related and affiliated persons of the issuer. A restricted digital asset owned by a related or affiliated person may only be offered or sold 12 months after the later of the date on which the asset was acquired or the digital asset maturity date. So, and later on, I believe we'll go through this definition of digital asset maturity date. So, this section, transactions in certain digital commodities, is exactly the same as this section. So this is sort of like the securities law version, and this is the commodities law version. We won't cover that because it's going to be exactly the same, basically. Next up, treatment of certain end user distributions under the securities law. They say, with respect to a digital asset, an end user distribution is if each blockchain system to which such digital asset relates is a functional network and the information described in Section 43 has been certified and made publicly available. So if you want to call it an end user distribution, which gets you out of some of these other requirements, then it has to be a functional network and you have to have certified that previous information. Actually, it's later. We'll go through that information in Section 43 below. For purposes of the securities law, an end user distribution shall not be a transaction in a security. So they're straight up saying if you have certified and made publicly available the information in Section 43 we're going to go through, and it's a functional network, then that asset that was a part of this end user distribution will not be a transaction in a security. That's great. It's just declared not to be a security. So here is the Section 43 enhanced disclosure requirements. So the source code for any blockchain system to which the asset relates, the transaction history, a description of the steps necessary to independently assess, search, and verify the transaction history, a description of the purpose of the blockchain, the operation of the blockchain, information explaining the launch and supply process, including the number of digital assets to be issued in an initial allocation, the total number of digital assets should be created, the release schedule, the total number of digital assets then outstanding. Information on any applicable consensus mechanism or process for validating transactions, method of generating or mining digital assets, and any process for burning or destroying digital assets on the blockchain system. So obviously in Cardano, we would describe how blocks are validated. That would be through our proof of stake systems. We'd have to have a description of Ouroboros, but that's pretty easy for us in Cardano because we have all kinds of academic papers that already describe exactly how all this works. An explanation of governance mechanisms. I'm sure Ethereum people are seeing this and saying, oh no, because they're going to have to explain how governance happens in Ethereum. And I still contend that probably the Federal Reserve's FOMC meetings, which are basically their governance mechanism, I still contend that those are probably more decentralized than the way decisions are made in Ethereum. So we'll have to wait and see if Ethereum can explain their governance mechanism and whether that explanation is very satisfactory to the Ethereum fans. So sufficient information for a third party to create a tool for verifying the transaction history of the digital asset. The plan of development. A list of all persons who are related persons or affiliated who have been issued a unit of the digital asset. Risk factors. And then a certification. The information has been certified if the digital asset issuer or related person certifies on a quarterly basis to the SEC and the CFTC that the information here is true and correct. So there's going to be a quarterly certification of veracity. So somebody who's related to the issuer is going to have to do this quarterly certification of veracity. That's good because then they're going to have to make sure that everything's correct because they don't want to be caught certifying something is correct to the SEC and to the CFTC when it doesn't turn out to be correct. So it's going to be great. The public will be able to rely on the information that we get out of these Section 43 disclosures. That's going to be fantastic. Certification of certain digital assets. So this is going to be the certification as to decentralization. Any person may certify to the Securities and Exchange Commission that the blockchain system to which a digital asset relates is a decentralized network. So anybody can go to the SEC and certify that the blockchain is decentralized. And here are the requirements for that filing. Information regarding the person making the filing, this is any person, a description of the blockchain and the digital asset, the operation of the blockchain, the functionality of the asset, any decentralized governance system. Again, certain blockchains that don't have on-chain governance are going to have trouble with this. The process to develop consensus or agreement within such decentralized governance system. Again, some of those same blockchains are going to have trouble explaining how they actually reach consensus because they don't really have a formal mechanism in a lot of cases. A description of the development of the blockchain system and the digital asset, a history of the development of the blockchain system and the digital asset, a description of the issuance process, information identifying the digital asset issuer, a list of any affiliated persons, an analysis of the factors on which such person based the certification. I think these factors are going to lay out right here might end up being similar to the University of Edinburgh decentralization index factors, but we'll see. An explanation of the protections and prohibitions available during the previous 12 months against any person being able to control or materially alter the blockchain system. So over the last 12 months, you must have had protections and prohibitions available to prevent any one person from being able to control or materially alter the blockchain or exclude any other person from using or participating on the blockchain system. So these are blockchains that engage in censorship when you blacklist somebody's account. We see this happen with certain stable coins quite a bit, and also other regular fungible assets. We see them blacklisting certain addresses. So this is kind of separate from sort of OFAC violations and blacklisting, of Tornado Cash users, that kind of thing, certain wallets that are using Tornado Cash or something like that. This is like the issuer coming along and saying, we're going to exclude X person from using the blockchain. So sometimes those two things can overlap, but that can't have been going on. And there must have been prohibitions and protections in place to prevent that from happening, or from any one person controlling or materially altering the blockchain system. So I think in Cardano, we can hit that pretty readily because, again, we have 3 different founding entities and they all have keys, and 2 of the entities have to get together in order to do anything. So there's no one person. So information regarding the beneficial ownership of the digital asset, which relates to the blockchain and the distribution of voting power, the history of upgrades to the source code, a description of any consensus or agreement process utilized to process or approve changes to the source code, and a list of any material changes to the source code, the purpose and effect of the changes, and the contributor of the changes if known. So what happens with these kind of reports is there are going to be law firms who just kind of specialize in crafting all these disclosures. And you look at this and you're like, well, this sounds pretty technical, this section. I think this is more of a technical thing, but guess who's going to make a lot of money on this? The attorneys who put together these kinds of certifications. There's going to be attorneys drafting these in a lot of cases, and they're probably going to make quite a bit of money figuring out exactly how to craft these certifications so that they will pass the SEC. So they'll also need any changes to the source code made by the issuer, a related person, or an affiliated person, and information regarding any activities conducted to market the digital asset. Also, any issuance of a unit of the digital asset which relates to the blockchain system during the last 12 months. So a bunch of things required for this decentralization this certification as to decentralization. Anybody can make it, but there's quite a bit involved. If we come down here, we find out there's a rebuttable presumption here. The commission may rebut a certification. So they might say, hey, we don't think that certification of decentralization is going to pass muster here. So they can rebut a certification if the commission, within 30 days of receiving such certification, determines that the blockchain system is not a decentralized network. So the SEC has 30 days from receipt of the certification to either come back and say, nope, we're rebutting this presumption of decentralization. We've determined it's not a centralized network. So here's how that review will work. So any blockchain shall be considered a decentralized network 30 days after the commission receives the certification, unless the commission notifies the person who made the certification within those 30 days that there was an inadequate explanation by the person making the certification, or there are novel or complex issues which require additional time to consider whether or not this network is decentralized. I can imagine that like a Gensler SEC would try to say that there are novel or complex issues on every single filing, just to extend this out, and then they would kind of just slow roll everybody, stall everybody, so that nobody can have this certification. And then they'll spend a lot of time trying to come up with, reasons why the certification inadequately explained, some of those factors or something. So this is why attorneys are probably going to make a lot of money writing these decentralization certifications for different blockchains. Next up, liability for providing false information. This is important to know if you're thinking about filing one of these certifications. It shall be unlawful for any person to provide false information in support of a certification. So you will be committing a crime. It will be unlawful if you lie in one of these certifications, obviously. And this title shall take effect 360 days after the date of enactment of this act. So a full year after this thing is enacted is when these kinds of provisions would go into effect. That's pretty slow, kind of disappointing for all of us in crypto, I think. As promised, we just skipped 126 pages that has to do with intermediary registration stuff, more of the kind of stuff that the centralized exchange lawyers will be poring over. They'll be poring over this section, especially if it passes. But I think for today, this video is long enough already. We will skip all that, and we'll let them worry about that section. We'll come here to the end. There are 2 sections where I think the House of Representatives commissions committees, sorry. The committees that created this bill did something really smart. They acknowledged that they probably don't know enough about DeFi and NFTs to figure out how to regulate them yet. So what they're doing is including in this bill provisions to study DeFi and NFTs before they decide how to regulate them. So this section says the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Commodities Futures Trading Commission, the SEC and the CFTC, shall jointly carry out a study on decentralized finance that analyzes nature, size, role, and use, operation, interoperability of blockchain protocols, and software-based systems, including websites and wallets, decentralized governance systems, whether the systems enhance or detract from the decentralization of DeFi, the inherent risks of decentralized governance systems, any procedures or requirements that would mitigate the risks, the benefits of DeFi, including operational resilience and interoperability, market competition and innovation, transaction efficiency, transparency and traceability of transactions, disintermediation, and the risks of decentralized finance, including pseudonymity of users and transactions, disintermediation, and cybersecurity vulnerabilities. Really interesting here that they list disintermediation as both a risk and a possible benefit. And I think they're right. The extent to which decentralized finance has integrated with the traditional financial markets. And when I say I think they're right, I mean, from their perspective, disintermediation can be pretty scary, but obviously from a crypto viewpoint, that's exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to disintermediate Wall Street basically with DeFi. How the levels of illicit activity in DeFi compare with traditional markets, how DeFi may increase the availability of cross-border transactions, the feasibility of embedding self-executing compliance and risk controls into DeFi. That sounds pretty scary. Self-executing compliance, that a lot of bad things could come under that label. And a report on the study shall come out 1 year after the date of enactment of this act. So again, we get another 360-day delay, 365-day delay. That kind of sucks, but what can we do? So the study on NFTs, similar, slightly different. So they're going to study the nature, size, role, purpose, and use of NFTs, similarities and differences between NFTs and other digital assets, how NFTs are minted by issuers and subsequently administered, how NFTs are stored after being purchased, interoperability, scalability, benefits, including verifiable digital ownership, risks, including to intellectual property rights, cybersecurity risks, and market risks, and whether and how non-fungible digital assets have integrated with traditional marketplaces, including those for music, real estate, gaming, events, and travel. Actually, it makes me kind of happy to see that they understand that the big benefit is verifiable digital ownership and that there are use cases in exactly these things: music, real estate, gaming, events, and travel. A lot of other places, but this is a fine place for them to start. Whether NFTs can be used to facilitate commerce or other activities through the representation of documents, identification, contract licenses, and other commercial, governmental, or personal records. Also good use cases. Any potential risks to such traditional markets, levels and types of illicit activity. I think they're going to find a lot of wash trading. And again, the report will come out not later than 1 year after the enactment of this act. So that is the FIT21 bill. Like I said, we skipped 126 pages or something, but this may be as good as it gets for us. I don't love some of the accredited investor stuff. I don't love that the SEC, we have to fight with the SEC over certifications of the decentralization of our networks. There's certain things in here that the crypto community at large is not going to love, but I think this is probably as good as we can get, because even the very pro-crypto Congress people, the people in Congress who are very pro-crypto, congressmen and congresswomen, they have to make a deal with the anti-crypto people. And it's much better that we have a deal like this, even though there's some things we're not going to love in here. It's much better to have that deal than to have this regulatory uncertainty where the SEC just picks and chooses who it files enforcement actions against. Like, that is not a good environment for crypto as a sector of the economy, this young, burgeoning, blossoming sector of the economy. It's not a great way for us to grow. this deal we could grow under. There's some things in here that are troubling, like I said, especially the accredited investor thing. But this is probably better. This is probably better than where we are right now. So I hope this gets through the House. I hope when it goes to the Senate, it doesn't get mangled and tortured and contorted into something, far, far worse. I'm sure we're going to hear from the dragon. She's once this gets to the Senate and they try to conform what, some of the things they have in the Senate, like the Lummis Gillibrand bill, when they try to, reconcile that bill with this, it's like, who knows what could come out the other end, because we have people like the dragon in the Senate. So we'll watch this. We'll see where it goes. Hopefully what we end up with is regulatory certainty, and it's something we can live with. I think this is probably, with the few exceptions I mentioned, this is probably about as good a deal as we're going to get. I hope you had a great weekend, and I'll talk to you soon.